Welcome to the Mushroom Cult Agar series. In this video, we're going to go over all the details of preparing agar before pouring Petri plates. This is the first video in the series. It's designed to help you think through the process before you get started with agar and to give you a few tips to help you succeed along the way. So let's get started. Our materials list is starting with 500 milliliters of water, which is just slightly more than 2 cups. We have a flat edged spatula for scraping the pot. We have a pouring vessel. In this video, we're going to use a 1-quart mason jar with its lid. I prefer to use a Erlenmeyer flask. You're going to also need a lid for that. We're just going to use the standard mason jar lid with the lid upside down. If you're using a flask, you may need a cotton ball or something to plug the opening, as well as a foil cap to keep it dry. The next thing is the agar powder itself. We'll also need a small sauce pot that has a good pouring lip. We'll need a pressure cooker that's able to get to 15 psi. You might need hot mitts, and you definitely need some kind of a stove. So we have the sauce pot on the stove with no heat. And for this step, you want to make sure that you have 10 minutes set aside to babysit the stirring. We're going to add the agar powder to the sauce pot. And next we're going to put just a small amount of the 500 milliliters of water into this powder, just enough to wet it, to make sure that we get all of the powder wetted. We're going to stir it in, make sure there's no clumps, no lumps, no dry spots, until it looks nice and smooth, just about like this. Next we're going to add the rest of the 500 milliliters in order to blend it all the way through and get it dissolved right away. Note about water is if you wouldn't drink the water, you probably wouldn't use it in agar. Just use whatever water that you drink, whether it's filtered or tap water. Next, we're going to be turning on the heat, and you're going to be wanting to stir constantly, scraping the sides and making sure that none of the agar powder sticks to the edge and that it's dissolved into the water. So we have the heat on high, and we're going to start stirring constantly. You can see the powder has already settled out and it's stirring in. We want to constantly stir when we have the heat on so that it doesn't stick to the sides of the pot. And we're going to constantly stir, no breaks, because you don't want to burn it and you don't want it sticking to the sides of the pot. This agar solution that we're making is more formally known as Agar-Agar and is a gelling agent made from certain species of red algae. Like the name suggests, it's a combination of 2 ingredients, agarose and agropectin, which together form the gel that we use in mycology. We use agar as a matrix to hold water and nutrients for the mycelium to access while it's in our care. Agar displays this interesting property related to its melting and freezing points called hysteresis, which means agar resists melting until about 185 degrees Fahrenheit, which is why we have the heat on high and we're going to wait till it gets to a boil. And it freezes at a much lower temperature at around 104 degrees Fahrenheit. So this gives us kind of a buffer for incubation, and it just resists change. There are numerous recipes for this agar solution, but the basic components are water, agar, sugar, and a complex nutrient source like yeast or potato. You can see that I'm still stirring. I'm waiting to see some steam. You might start seeing a little steam wafting. I'm feeling the bottom of the pot for sliminess. That would indicate that the agar is sticking to the pot. I'm scraping the sides. I'm doing this in sort of like a star motion in order to make sure that I'm not missing any part of the pot. This is also why I have a flat spatula, so that I can contact the whole pot. If I was using a round spoon, it would be a lot more difficult to make sure that I have grazed the bottom of the pot on everything. You can see the steam starting to waft up, and especially now, you do not want to stop to take a break, to go to the bathroom. You need to continue stirring in this methodical pattern until it gets to a boil. And I'm stirring a little bit faster now because the risk is a little higher of it gelling to the sides of the pot. because we're getting close to the agar's melting point. And at some point I'm going to have to stop stirring just to find out, is it boiling or not? Because there's a lot of like stove noise. You can kind of hear simmering and maybe bubbling and just the stove making some noise. So it's hard to tell if it's boiling yet. So I'll just stop stirring real quick and let the solution settle out, watching for that boiling. It's calming down and I'm not seeing the boiling happen. So I'm going to continue stirring pretty vigorously. You see the steam is coming off a lot faster. It's almost ready. We just got to have the patience to continue stirring. I can't emphasize that enough. You're wanting to make sure that it dissolves and none of the powder clumps together. We want to make sure that we get an even blend of nutrients and everything. Now you can see it's boiling. It's boiling pretty vigorously. So I am going to just stir it real quick and take it off the heat. Because at this point we've gone above 185 degrees and it's dissolved. So I've put the pot back on just briefly to just give it one last stir before we pour it. I want you to notice the sauce pot that I'm using has a really nice lip on it that pours really smoothly. Watch as it goes into the pouring vessel. This pouring vessel is just a quart jar with a regular mouth. We're only going to fill it half full. If you fill your jar any fuller than half, you're really likely to have it boil over during the pressure cooking process, and that just makes a mess and introduces the risk of contamination. So if you're using a quart jar, just use a regular lid, but put it on upside down to make sure it doesn't create a seal in the pressure cooker, and we'll use the ring. I'm going to snug it down and then go back 1/4 to make sure it's really loose. You can see how loose it is. I can pick up the jar with the lid, but it's very loose. So then we'll take this jar, and there's no real rush, but we can put it in the pressure cooker right away. So now you can see the pressure cooker, and I have it on high. I'm going to open it up, and the first thing I want you to notice is that there's about 1 inch of water in the bottom. I also want you to notice the canning rack, which we'll talk about later. I'm placing the pouring vessel in the center, and it's setting in the water on the rack. I'm going to close the lid, make sure that there's no pinching on the gasket, and we'll talk a little bit about why we have the water in there. The whole purpose of the pressure cooker is to raise the pressure inside above atmospheric pressure to the point that it raises the boiling point of water so we can get it hotter than if we just boiled it. So having the water in there is the driver for that whole system. We have the stove on high and it's putting heat into the pot and into the water, which causes the water to change state from liquid to gas. And if you notice on the top of the pressure cooker, there's a weight, which is called the pressure regulator, towards the back of the pressure cooker. It's there to hold the pressure inside so that as the water turns from liquid to gas, it holds the pressure in there, which causes the temperature to rise higher than it normally would in regular atmosphere. With just an open pot, water at sea level boils at 212 degrees or 100 degrees Celsius. But when we put that pressure regulator on there that's designed to hold 15 pounds per square inch, we're able to get the temperature from 212 degrees up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit, or from 100 degrees Celsius to 121 degrees Celsius, which would be impossible without that pressure regulator. What that does is it allows us to get temperatures beyond normal ranges for spores and yeasts, bacterias, various contaminants, and we're able to hold that temperature for long enough in order to kill those, even if they're dormant. This pressure cooker can get up to 15 psi, but a common pressure cooker is called an instant pot. It's a little bit different in that its pressure regulator is set for 11.6 psi, which only gets the internal temperature to 143 degrees as opposed to 250, or in Celsius 117 as opposed to 121 degrees Celsius. So if you're using an Instant Pot, you may need to run longer than we are here. We're going to be running for 30 minutes once it gets up to 15 psi. So an Instant Pot might be fine at 30 minutes, but if you're noticing that you're having contamination problems, you need to increase that a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about pressure cooker safety. We already talked about the inch or two of water inside the pot. We talked about the canning rack before. The reason for that is we're setting the jar on the canning rack to create a separation between the jar and the base so that it heats up slower. Another one of the parts you can see we already talked about, it's on the top back side of the lid. That's the pressure regulator. It's a weight that is designed for different pressures. Some of them are 10, some of them are 15, some of them are 5. This one's designed for 15. That pressure regulator sits on the vent pipe, which is a small little tube that allows pressure to escape, steam to escape, and the pressure regulator prevents that to a certain pressure. Just in front of the pressure regulator is the overpressure plug. It's there as a safety measure in case the pot gets above a safe pressure. Instead of exploding, it will break that little plug will pop out and allow steam to escape, which wouldn't be a pleasant thing, but it wouldn't be as dangerous as an explosion. The next thing in front of that is the pressure dial gauge. That's what tells you if there is pressure inside. You never want to open a pressure cooker that has any pressure in it. It needs to be at 0 before you open it. It also tells you if you've reached the temperature that you want for sterilization at 15 psi. It also tells you if the pressure is above a safe range. So that's important. You'll know if it's calibrated properly, if your pressure regulator and your dial gauge show 15 psi as it starts rocking, which you'll see in a few minutes. There's the gasket on the inside of the lid, which is important. You want to make sure that it's seated in there properly and that it doesn't have any cracks in it. The main thing I want to emphasize is that you need to read the directions for your specific model and follow the safety guidelines for your pressure cooker. Make sure that you're not injuring yourself or anyone else. If you let the water dry up by running it too long or having it on too high of heat, the pressure cooker will, as it runs out of water, it'll maintain the pressure in there, and the temperature of the metal will be able to rise too high, and it can deform the pressure cooker, possibly causing an explosion, but definitely making it unsafe to use in the future. So you need to make sure that you have enough water in there. So right now we're just waiting for the pressure cooker to get up to temperature. You'll start hearing some sizzling. You're going to hear the water inside actually boiling, because it needs to get from room temperature or tap water temperature past boiling, so it's going to boil at some point, hopefully briefly. And that's where the risk of your pouring vessel overflowing, if you have it too full, is because it will pass boiling. And then as it goes above boiling, the pressure inside the tank will suppress the boiling. And you're just going to want to watch it. As soon as it gets up to 15 psi, you can set your timer for 30 minutes. Some people do it less, 20 minutes. You can see that on this pressure dial, it's above atmospheric pressure. It's starting to rise slowly. You can see it's close to 10 at this point. The pressure regulator is not sizzling yet. At this point, you can just check in on it periodically. You don't have to watch it constantly. You're going to be able to hear the pressure regulator start rocking when it gets to 15 psi. But we're just going to show you basically the time that it takes. You can see that it's moving up and up and up. And as soon as it gets to 15 psi, you're going to start hearing the pressure regulator sizzling. And at that point, I like to turn the stove down a little bit, maybe to medium high, and try to keep that pressure regulator sizzling as slow as possible, so that I don't dry up the pressure cooker, and also it's just kind of annoying. It makes a lot of noise, and it creates a lot of humidity in the house, and if it's a hot day, it makes the house extra hot. So it's a lot more energy efficient if you turn it down. We're getting pretty close to 15 psi, but not quite. You can see that it's starting to rock right about now, right about at 15 psi. So that's how you know that your gauge is calibrated to your weight. At this point, I want it to get up to like a full sizzle, and I am starting my timer at 30 minutes right as it starts. So in 30 minutes, I'm going to take it off the heat and let it cool down. So I've turned the heat down to like medium high, and I'm just watching carefully because I don't want it to fall below 15 psi, but I want to get that rocker to go as little as possible, even to the point that I don't really hear it sizzling, but when I walk through the kitchen, it starts sizzling. But just a really slow simmer would be great, just for my own sanity and listening to it, and also the energy efficiency. But the main reason is that if you have it sizzling too high, you can boil all the water out. That would be really dangerous. It's slowing down a little bit. At this point, I usually start cleaning my workspace. So I'll maybe use a bathroom, or depending on your circumstances, you can use the kitchen. You just want to be careful of having drafts that could blow contaminants in. But basically, you want to clean your area from top to bottom, starting at the top, cleaning cobwebs and wiping the walls down, working all the contaminants down to the floor. The last thing you want to do is clean the floor. And if you're using a bathroom, maybe I would close the door and let the contaminants settle down, just so that we have a still air area. Another common thing would be to use a still air box. It's abbreviated SAB. That's something that you can use in an area that isn't perfectly clean. It kind of traps a little pocket of air, and you're able to clean the inside of a tub through a couple of armholes, and just sort of traps an area that keeps the air still, so that we're not having spores blowing in and out. So I would just get my area prepared. So once the timer goes off after the 30 minutes, I'll turn the power off on the stove. And the main thing is you want to make sure that the pressure gauge goes all the way down to 0. You do not want to attempt to open it before it's down to atmospheric pressure. It's likely that you won't be able to open it, but just in case you did, the lid would blast off and there'd be steam all over the place and burns. So you just want to be really careful about that. So I've turned the heat off and the rocker is stopped. I'm going to take this off the heat and let it cool. I normally will just set my timer for 2 hours, and I'll just wait the 2 hours for the agar to cool down in the pressure cooker. That's usually good enough, so that the agar gets down cool enough so that I can pour it with my hand without using a mitten. But for this video, I want to show an option of how you would test the temperature if you wanted to get it down to 104. You can see the pressure cooker is down to 0 on the pressure, so I'm able to open the lid just by sliding it to the side. And I'm opening the lid so that the lid opens away from me, because there's going to be all kinds of steam and I don't want to burn myself. The temperature is about just a little bit under boiling at this point, so approaching 200 degrees. I would usually open the pressure cooker in my cleaned environment to make sure that we're not getting spores and bacteria on the vessel. I'm just doing this for a demonstration on how we would measure the temperature. You don't want to put your thermometer in your pouring vessel, because you'd be contaminating it with this tool and by opening it. So we're using the thermometer in the water bath that's in the pressure cooker to figure out what temperature it is. You'll be able to see that it's just under 200, maybe it's 180, looks like. You can pour it at this point, but the jar is going to be quite hot, and before you get through a stack of plates, you might be burning your hand. You're also going to be having a lot more condensation because as the water in the agar evaporates, it's going to condense on the cooler Petri plate. So I'm just giving a little extra time. Maybe it's been 20 more minutes. I'm checking the temperature again by putting the thermometer in the water bath, and it's going up. It looks like it is pretty close to 104 degrees, which is the temperature that it starts to solidify. So I don't want to get too close to 104. You can see there it's around 105. So now at this point it's ready to pour. So I'll just put this in my workstation, and that's all for this video. Stay tuned for further videos on pouring and agar techniques. Follow us on Facebook at Mushroom Cult Pro, and talk to you later.